Hello, and welcome to another episode of Chuchu is a Ranker. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing Morrissey. So Morrissey was, of course, the frontman of the Smiths before setting off on his rather turbulent solo career. At various times, he's either been a critical darling or a total media pariah. So now let's address the elephant in the room. I'm not here to judge Morrissey's perceived politics. I believe in free speech, but do I agree with Morrissey's recent political affiliations? No, I don't. But that doesn't affect my love of the man's music, because he doesn't preach or make reference to such things in his songs. So with that, let's push all that political crap to the back and concentrate solely upon his musical output. Morrissey really doesn't make lists like this very easy, as over the past decade he's been going back and making changes to all his old albums. Some of them have been significantly altered, so which version to rank? I assume we're all here to find the very best of Morrissey, thus I am going to rank the best version, or what I perceive to be the best version of each of his albums. During such entries I'm going to pay lip service to why I've made that choice. For this list, I'm only going to be ranking Morrissey's studio albums, so no compilations, live albums or best-ofs here. This does lead to one huge omission from the list, however, which of course is Bone a Drag, the 1990 singles and B-side compilation. That album is an essential cog in the Morrissey machine and absolutely shouldn't be skipped. If I were to rank it on this list, it would be pretty high, so make sure you check that one out. So anyway, I've already rambled on way too long about nothing in particular, so let's be complete rankers and rank up a storm. This is Morrissey's studio albums ranked from worst to best. So we're going to be kicking off this list with Ringleader of the Tormentors, which was the follow-up to Morrissey's biggest selling album, You Are the Quarry. Unfortunately, this is a pretty lame effort and doesn't recapture any of the momentum from the previous record. Now, Tony Visconti is a legend, but here his production is all kinds of wrong. Morrissey's vocals are pushed up way too high in the mix and it drowns out the rest of the band, completely robbing the songs of their energy. The album is also insanely front-loaded. All of the decent songs are on the A-side, and there are some good songs on here. You Have Killed Me, which is the lead-off single, was Morrissey's last true hit and is supremely catchy. In the Future, When All's Well and The Youngest Was the Most Loved make for some nice follow-up singles, and The Father Who Must Be Killed, which is the best song on the entire album in my opinion, just begs to be on a better LP. Also, the opening track, I Will See You in Far Off Places, has some really nice Eastern riffs. I'm a big fan of that. But as soon as you hit the dirgy, overlong Life as a Pigsty, the whole record just falls apart. Everything else sounds like a poor B-side. There's nothing of any note save for the back nine here. The album really reaches its nadir during the last two tracks, I Just Want to See the Boy Happy and At Last I Am Bored, which are pretty much my least favourite Morrissey tracks ever. So the album's not a complete loss because side one is pretty good, but definitely this is the weakest Morrissey record for my money. Next up is Low in High School, which is a bit of a shiftless record. It's kind of like a transitional album, working like a bridge between World Peace Is None of Your Business and I Am Not a Dog on a Chain. It maintains some of the international flavour of the former, whilst also setting up the synth direction of the latter, but unfortunately is nowhere near as good as either of those albums. Basically, this album has like 3 good songs on it. Spent the Day in Bed, which is one of Morrissey's best late period singles. It's super fun and catchy. I Wish You Lonely has a nice synth stomp to it and also has some great lyrics. I love that final stanza about the humpback whales. That's just so Morrissey. It's really cool. The best song on the album by far, in my opinion, is the closing track Israel, which is a beautiful, gorgeous piano ballad and easily amongst Morrissey's finest closing tracks. Elsewhere, things are really shaky. It just sounds like more B-side filler material. The tracks on the A-side are the worst this time. Tracks like My Love I'd Do Anything For You or Home Is a Question Mark are just so anonymous, they could be by anybody. Ironically, a lot of the really lazy cuts on the back half of the LP, such as All the Young People Must Fall in Love, When You Open Your Legs or Who Will Protect Us from the Police, well, they actually kind of give me a bit of guilty pleasure. They're just so Morrissey-esque. Like, no one on the world except Morrissey could have possibly made those songs. So yeah, this album is really inconsistent, and I can't in all good conscience recommend it, but for a hardcore Morrissey fan, it has some moments. Years of Refusal is made by the same team that did You Are the Quarry, except this time the pace, volume and energy have really been ramped up. Unfortunately, so has the vapidity. Lyrically, there's just not too much going on this album, bar the final track perhaps. This really isn't the Morrissey album you should turn to for depth or substance. That said, the volume and the pace paper over a lot of the cracks, and the album ends up being a bit of boisterous, throwaway fun. There aren't really any truly great songs here, but a couple do stand out above the others. One Day Goodbye Will Be Farewell has some really euphoric trumpets and synths on it. It really reminds me of the final countdown, which was obviously a very good thing because that's an amazing song. The closing I'm Okay By Myself is a thunderous piece of snarling pop punk with the best lyrics on the album for sure. Whilst the opening track Something Is Squeezing My Skull is a whip it fast slice of punky catchiness. Most of the other songs are a bit more forgettable, but still fun enough. The only real sore point on the album is You Were Good in Your Time, which kind of devolves into this extended atmospheric outro that goes nowhere and just brings the album to a screeching halt. So basically this record isn't bad. Quick shout out to All You Need Is Me and That's How People Grow Up, those are also really fun songs. But it's too vacuous to get further up the list. But if you're looking for Moz's loudest record, it's definitely either this or Southpaw Grammar. Morrissey's cover album California Sun is next up, and you know what? It's absolutely delightful. It's well produced, well sequenced, and it works as a proper album rather than just a selection of random covers. Morrissey himself is obviously having fun here, and his vocal performance is full of passion. He just sounds really great on this record. There are plenty of highlights on it too. The opening rendition of Joe Bryant's Morning Starship is so inside Morrissey's wheelhouse that it really sounds like one of his originals. Other standouts on this record include It's Over and Wedding Bell Blues, which sounds rather like the Smiths, and my personal favourite, Lady Willpower, which is just a gorgeous, triumphant piece of pop music. Elsewhere, there are just no bad songs. Everything is pretty consistent. In fact, the only reason this album stalls here on the list is because it's a covers album. As nice as it is, I'm just ultimately more interested in his original material. But, you know, despite that, this is still a really great addition to his discography. Number 9 on the list is Morrissey's most recent album, the synth-infused I Am Not a Dog on a Chain. Although, at the time of recording, he's gearing up to release a new record named Bonfire of Teenagers, so I wonder where that would rank on this list. So, this album is frustrating in that it's almost really good. The first 8 back-to-back songs on here are just awesome. Like the opening track, Jim Jim Falls, is nihilistically hilarious, urging people to shut up and kill themselves rather than constantly yap on about it. Love Is On Its Way Out, Knockabout World, and Once I Saw the Riverbed Clean nicely display the synth direction and are just really catchy. The latter has some lovely lyrics about Morrissey shopping with his grandmother, which is uncharacteristically sweet. Aww. I also love the lead single, Bobby Don't You Think They Know, which almost has like a jazz quality to it and is definitely one of the better longer Morrissey songs. Unfortunately, this album doesn't quite make it to the finish line, as the last 3 songs on it are just not very good. The Truth About Ruth is like a boring piano twinkler, nothing much going on there. The Secret of Music is just another one of those overlong, atmosphere-orientated Morrissey snooze fests. Like, the lyrics on this are just like he's just basically singing random instrument related things like pan pipe save a life. It's like what and the final track is also a bit overlong and forgettable, you know. But as to that kind of like overlong atmospheric thing, Morrissey's really got to stop going back to that well, because again and again he does that same type of thing and he just keeps failing at it. So yeah, this is a qualified release for sure. But the songs that it does well, it does really well, and I just find it more entertaining than the previous entries. World Peace is None of Your Business is easily the best of Morrissey's late period albums. It has a lot of world music influences on it. There's some Spanish, French, African and even Middle Eastern instrumentation played with here. For a Morrissey record, it's pretty experimental and avant-garde. Morrissey really lets his band off the leash on this album, and it's one of his most musically interesting efforts. Highlights include the hilarious Neil Cassidy Drops Dead. I love the semi-rap Morrissey does about diseased babies on that one. It's so funny. The little fella has got rubella. Staircase at the University is my personal favourite from the LP, a catchy piece of traditional Morrissey on an otherwise unusual record, bolstered by just an absolutely gorgeous Spanish guitar solo. That's so wonderful. The Bullfighter Dies and Kick the Bride Down the Aisle accentuates some of the comedy aspects of the album. This is definitely one of Morrissey's funniest records. Another great catchy addition is Kiss Me A Lot, which I can't help just singing along to every time it comes on. To be honest, there's not much in the way of negative things to say about this album for me. Maybe at 55 minutes, it's a touch too long on the whole. And the last two tracks, well, not bad, do take an incremental step down in quality, so the album doesn't exactly end on a high. But yeah, overall, this is just a great addition to Morrissey's catalogue and proof that he still has some gas left in the tank. Southpaw Grammar sees Morrissey suddenly switch gears and trying to make a heavy rock record. It's almost like Morrissey was jamming to a combination of Nirvana and Metallica during this period. There's a lot of pace, heavy guitars and clattering punk breakdowns on this album, which makes it pretty frenetic and exciting. The version of this record I'm choosing to rank is actually the original version, the one with 8 tracks. Most of the additions to the remaster are actually pretty good. You Should Have Been Nice to Me and Honey You Know Where to Find Me are pretty great unreleased tracks, and No One Loves Us was always one of Morrissey's best B-sides. But the remaster also has Fantastic Bird on it, which is an offcut from the Your Arsenal sessions and just doesn't sound like it belongs here. Also, the revised sequencing doesn't quite work, with the two 10-minute long bookending songs from the original shifted into really strange positions. The record also heads into serious overlength on the remaster, and it ultimately ends up feeling more like a compilation rather than a studio album. So anyway, back to the original. The middle 6 songs of the 8 are pretty much flawless Morrissey tracks. Boy Racer and Dagenham Dave are really funny and catchy singles, full of pace and growling guitars. The Operation has a 2-minute drum solo and an extended punk freakout for an outro. It's pretty badass. That song also has some great backing vocals by Alan White. Actually, his vocals are great across this record, his counter melodies against Morrissey often teasing out a frisson of sadness out of the booming distortion. Best Friend on the Payroll is a really good example of this. The only snags this album hits are in its 2 epic bookending songs. The opener, The Teachers Are Afraid of the Pupils, is the more successful of the two, weaving guitars in and out of a classic Shostakovich symphony. As good as it is though, at 11 minutes long, it's just too long and can't quite maintain its quality the whole way through. Closing track Southpaw is excellent during the main section of the song, the singing section, but then again it just devolves into an atmospheric coda where nothing much happens. It's just way too long and gets boring fast. Usually I'm reaching for the skip button. Well, not skip button, the stop button, because it's literally the end of the record, but you know what I mean. That said, Southpaw Grammar is still a fine, energetic, full-throttle Morrissey record, and highly recommended. It's just great. Kill Uncle is an unusual Morrissey record that doesn't sound anything like Morrissey has recorded before or since. Morrissey's songwriting partner for this outing was Marky Nevin, previously of the chart-topping Fairground Attraction, and he brings the same kind of lightweight skiffle pop influences to Kill Uncle as his previous band. Now, the version of Kill Uncle I'm including here is actually the remaster. I feel that the addition of Passionate Love and the Herman Hermits cover East West brings some extra pace to the middle of the album, which is something the original lacked a little. Pace is also helped by swapping the original piano version of There Is a Place in Hell for Me and My Friends for the more rocking live K-Rock version. Although I do miss the gorgeous resigned sadness of the piano version, I can always just go back and listen to it on the original album pretty much any time I want, so I'm okay with that. Highlights on the LP include the twin singles which now open the record, Are Frank and Sing Your Life, the latter of which has a beautiful restrained 1960s build-up. It's just wonderful. Driving Your Girlfriend Home really leans into the album's lightness, and the closing track, I'm the End of the Family Line, is a really great mournful ballad with a fun closing fake out. I mean, just try not to sing along with that final surprise chorus. You just can't do it. This album is just charming from start to finish, and it only stumbles once with another, you guessed it, overlong atmospheric outro where nothing happens, this time on the track The Harsh Truth of the Camera's Eye. But still, despite that small blip, Kill Uncle is full of nostalgia and classic tunes, and although it was much maligned upon release, I really feel that this album has stood the test of time as a classic Morrissey record. Your Arsenal is Morrissey's full-on glam rock record, which is a genre that fit him like a glove back in the early 90s. It's also the first album made with Alan White and Boz Bora, who would make up the backbone of Morrissey's songwriting and performing team for many years to come. The remaster and the original are basically identical for this album, the only real difference being a slightly remixed version of the final track, Tomorrow. I do prefer the remaster though, simply on the grounds of sound quality. The remaster has just so much more energy than the original now that everything is cleaner and clearer. Basically, Your Arsenal is an album comprised of 10 really good songs. There's just no dead wood on this album at all. Catchy, raucous singles are provided via We Hate It When Our Friends Become Successful and You're the One for Me Fatty. They might not be the deepest Morrissey cuts, but they're silly and entertaining and just really fun. The emotional core of the album is contained within the last 3 songs, Seasick Yet Still Docked, I Know It's Gonna Happen Someday and Tomorrow, so the LP really finishes strong and leaves you wanting more. On a personal note, I really love Seasick Yet Still Docked. It's one of the Morrissey songs that really meant a lot to me when I was growing up. However, my favourite on the album is actually We'll Let You Know, a song about football hooliganism, but there's something oddly transcendent about it. It seems to perfectly capture the sadness of the passing of time and a world and a culture that doesn't exist anymore. It's just an absolute masterpiece, a really stunning song. Ultimately, Your Arsenal is a fantastic record, start to finish. The only reason it doesn't scale any higher on this list is that I slightly prefer the records that are yet to come. So, every list needs a controversial entry, and here's mine. So I can already hear you angrily clacking on your keyboards, but just hold on a second, take a deep breath, and bear with me for a little bit. So, Maladjusted then. Let's make no bones about it, the original 1997 release was a stinker. It was poorly sequenced and had grade A shit like Papa Jack on it, and left most of the really good tracks from the sessions to languish as B-sides and attendant singles. There were some sporadically great moments on the original album, however. Trouble Loves Me and Wide to Receive were classic Morrissey ballads, while the fantastic title track Maladjusted and the awesome single Satan Rejected My Soul sorted the rockier side of things. But even with these decent tracks, the original version of the album could still never be considered anything other than a lackluster offering. The remastered version of Maladjusted, however, is a far more satisfying record. The album's 11 tracks have now been bulked up to 15, and 2 of the weakest cuts, Papa Jack and Roy's Keane, have been excised completely. The album also has been perfectly sequenced, which, as I mentioned before, was a real sore point on the original 1997 version. He Cried, for example, sank without a trace on the original LP, but here on this remaster it just comes roaring out of the speakers like the greatest Morrissey single that never was. The integrated B-sides all work wonderfully too, and make for a lot of the album's highlights. The Edges Are No Longer Parallel turns out to be a great sister epic to the opening Maladjusted, and tracks like I Can Have Both and Now I Am or Was add some catchy pop hooks to the mostly dour proceedings. But it's the overall feeling, atmosphere and depth that make this new version of Maladjusted really shine. The original felt like a slapdash bunch of songs thrown together without any notion of a cohesive whole. The remaster totally nails it in this regard. Maladjusted has somehow transformed into one of Morrissey's most emotional and personal records. It really feels like a proper ride through the darkness and misery that clutters his mind. The album now flows so well that even some of the weaker bluster like Ambitious Outsiders and Sorrow Will Come in the End gets swept up in the tide and carried to a satisfying conclusion. It's likely that Maladjusted will always be pilloried as a creative low point for Morrissey, and one that put paid to his career for 7 years. But this remaster makes you seriously wonder what could have been if he had put out this version back in 1997. Could the full Maladjusted experience have revitalized Morrissey's career instead of destroying it? I don't know, who knows. But what I do know is that this remastered, extended and resequenced version of Maladjusted simply makes for one of his best albums ever. You Are the Quarry was Morrissey's comeback album. After the abject critical and commercial failure of Maladjusted, Morrissey went away for 7 years and kind of faded into partial obscurity. Then, the tide of fashion suddenly switched and Morrissey was cool again, and actually briefly became the most famous pop star in England. It's weird to think that Morrissey having a #1 hit single was actually plausible at this point in his career. You Are the Quarry just thrums with mainstream pop energy. A lot of the drums on this record have a kind of trip-hoppy groove to them, and there's also a lot of burbling synths on here, which was definitely new for Morrissey at the time. In terms of success, this is Morrissey's biggest selling album and actually features 4 UK top 10 singles. Irish Blood English Heart and First of the Gang to Die are absolute Morrissey classics, 2 of the best singles he ever released. They're super catchy and full of energy. But it's actually the depth that makes this record so great. Morrissey sounds like he has things to say here and spends a good portion of the album spitting ire at various targets. This is almost certainly the angriest Morrissey record. He has a go at Americans on the rhythmic America Is Not the World. He retorts to the media on the gorgeous I'm Not Sorry and Irish Blood English Heart. Complains about pretty much everyone and everything on the vicious How Can Anybody Possibly Know How I Feel, and even gives Jesus a good old kicking on the self-deprecating ballad I Have Forgiven Jesus. The highlight of the album for me though is The World Is Full of Crashing Bores, which has some of my favourite lyrics ever. It's just so snarky and funny and makes me go into karaoke mode every time I hear it. I love that song. And talking about loving or liking things, I either like or love pretty much every track on this album. Even the weaker cuts like All the Lazy Dykes or You Know I Couldn't Last have something fun about them, whether it's a grand chorus or some savagely fun lyrics. You Are the Quarry is just a brilliant album, top to bottom, definitely one of Morrissey's best. Next up, the time has come to celebrate Viva Hate. First, let's talk about which version I'm going to be ranking on this list. Okay, the remaster. That remaster can go fuck itself. Oh my god, Morrissey, what were you doing? You have been a bad boy, and you were going to bed without any supper. Okay, deep breath. So onto the original version of Viva Hate, the good version. So I'm going to set this up on a personal level. Like a lot of people, I had a pretty dark time in my teenage years, and that was right when I found Morrissey's. And actually, Viva Hate was the first ever Morrissey record that I ever listened to. I listened to it even before I'd listened to the Smiths. So words cannot describe how much this LP meant to me. It was like someone was there in my room beside me, like holding my hand, whispering that everything was going to be alright. This album hit my heart like an arrow and changed everything. The way I dressed, the music I listened to, my goals for the future. I even sported a giant quiff for a few ill-advised months. I mean, the impact on me was really intense from this record. But that's probably how Morrissey meant it. Viva Hate was his first solo record, and one which was recorded a mere 6 months after the Smiths broke up. He was hurt and betrayed, hence the album's title Viva Hate, but rather than fill the record with spite, Morrissey instead retreated to his past, back to his own poverty-stricken teenage years in 1970s Manchester. Because of this, the whole album seeps with nostalgia and the sepia visions of a long-lost verdant England. Being an Englishman myself, this was both very alluring and oh so true. The album's great single and undoubted highlight, Every Day Is Like Sunday, with its breezing synth strings and references to cheap trays and grease tea, feels comfortingly familiar to anyone who's ever had the misfortune to spend a family weekend at Bognor Regis. Likewise, the 7-minute moan of sadness that is Late Night Magdalen Street perfectly drags up images of uniform rows of terraced council houses that make up the urban greys of England's bigger cities. Elsewhere, the sadness becomes universal, devoid of location, but still aching from every pore. Break Up the Family is obviously about the Smiths, with Morrissey concluding, "Let me see all my old friends, let me put my arms around them, because I really do love them. Now does that sound mad?" Which makes for a stark contrast to his later bitter lyrics on the subject. It's such an easy sentiment to connect with on a personal level too. And that goes for the whole record. Like, as I said, it meant so much to me, and it was so easy just to kind of latch my sadness onto Morrissey's sadness. Songs like Angel, Angel Down We Go Together is about star-crossed lovers and disapproving parents and potential suicide. Suede Head is about a diary-stealing romantic obsession. Direly Cliche touches on sexual confusion and disapproving parents again. And Margaret on the Guillotine is about how much of an asshole Margaret Thatcher was. So, you know, all universal topics. And the musical contributions suit the album perfectly. They're simple and basic, yet still embrace the very same monochrome feelings as the words they frame. A lot of them feel like they've been ripped straight from a 60s pop record, with the likes of Little Man What Now, The Ordinary Boys, Dial Cliche, all bristling with retro cool. There are even some great flourishes here and there, with Bengali and Platforms having a delicious acoustic backing, whilst Margaret on the Guillotine features some beautiful Spanish trills running through the outro. I think the only musical misstep on the whole record is the psychotic hair metal guitar riff that rampages all over I Don't Mind If You Forget Me, but you know, I still love that song, it's still really catchy. In the end, Viva Hate is just top quality, perfect, classic Morrissey. It's just one of my favourite albums of all time and one of Morrissey's very, very best. Go check it out, it's brilliant. Finally, we come to Morrissey's best album, at least in my opinion. With Voxel and I, it doesn't matter which one you go for, the original or the remaster, because they're identical. Even Morrissey knew not to mess around with this one. The album is just an absolute masterpiece from top to bottom, from start to finish. Morrissey had suffered a spate of deaths in his inner circle, and was in a dark, sad space when he recorded this album. Voxel and I is just soaked and dripping with resigned sadness. It's Morrissey at his lowest ebb, but also at his creative high. This album has 4 of Morrissey's very, very best songs on it. The opening, Now My Heart Is Full, is so tender and brilliant that's reduced me to tears at certain points. Why Don't You Find Out For Yourself is his best ever musing about the woes of being a pop star, with Alan White's gorgeous acoustic backing shining as a real standout. The More You Ignore Me, The Closer I Get is insidiously catchy and rightly returned Morrissey to the top 10 singles charts in the UK. Arguably, my favourite Morrissey song ever, Speedway, closes the album in epic fashion, full of fury and fight, never backing down. I personally think it's the greatest closing track on any album ever. There are just no bad songs on this record. There are no bad moments on this record, not a second of dead air. It's perfectly sequenced, perfectly paced, it's just the right length and hits all the emotional highs. It also has like a resigned, almost shoegazy style of production that really heightens the sadness. It's just perfect, it's just wonderful. I love it so much. I never get tired of it, can listen to it every day, multiple times. It's just excellent. Voxel and I is Morrissey's best album, and truly one of the greatest albums ever made, and right up there with anything the Smiths ever recorded. So there we go, that's my list, but that might not be your list. You might have a completely different favourite Morrissey record. Ringleader of Tormentors for the win, yo! Feel free to sound off in the comment section and tell me your personal list. Like, comment, subscribe and all that type of YouTube jazz, and most importantly of all, just keep on ranking.